Welcome back. You're watching Business Week on Arise News. Energy is clearly an engine for Nigeria's industrialization, but if supply is insecure and inconsistent and not reliable, it might impact the country's ability to industrialize. Nigeria is fully harnessing some of its linkages to the energy sector, but there's still a lot more room for improvement in areas such as steel, manufacturing, and mining. Today, I'm joined by businessman, intellectual, and industry expert Ahmad Damcida, CEO of Energy Culture and founder of Fold-Tie Technologies, to give us his thoughts on how the energy sector can be a greater catalyst for industrialization. Mr. Damcida has worked across the entire value chain, supporting more than 50 projects related to energy infrastructure, power generation plants, gas production and processing plants, pipeline laying and installation, oil production, oil storage and transportation, modular refinery development, and oil-field equipment supply and logistics. His latest venture, Fold-Tie Technologies, is helping to innovate in the area of transportation technology such as electric vehicles and its possibilities for uptake across the Nigerian economy. Great to have you on the show. You have such a fantastic pedigree there.
Thank you very much.
The energy sector. So we have a lot to talk about. Yes, and you know, this issue of energy and industrialization, we talked about it, but we have to start with the basics and look at the energy sector itself, look at our supply, look at oil and gas supply, and ask about what some of the dynamics have been. In the last decade, one of the biggest dynamics has been IOCs divesting from Nigeria's oil and gas sector. And some would argue that's been one of the reasons you've had some of the output challenges. Others say it's part of a natural consolidation process if you're a global firm operating in different markets. I'd like to hear your takes on all these dynamics.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So, Rolake, there's several dimensions to this. First, divestment in itself, it's not an issue. But the process of divesting and then onboarding a new party should be seamless in the sense that production should be sustained across the future horizon.
Right.
That has not been achieved in this case.
Okay.
Why? Because, of course, the IOCs have reasons to divest. One, which is the energy transition. Second is to rebalance their portfolio. So they look at the entire portfolio globally and look at which is less profitable and decide on, divesting them. Because, I mean, if you look at Exxon left here and went to Guyana, right? So because Nigeria, is the least profitable among its portfolios, right? But onboarding new parties, what other countries have done is to create almost a like for like. Even if you want to favor your local players, it shouldn't be the usual friend and family type of arrangement. The IOCs want their money, right? So what you need to do is to ensure that they come in and mentor the new parties and sustain production over 24 months. I mean, if you're divesting to the likes of Seplat, there's no problem. Right. To the likes of Owando, there's no problem, right? But if you're divesting to someone without the initial structure to absorb this capacity that's been handed over to them, then it's a problem, right? You in 3-4 years, I mean, besides that, 2013 or so, right? $7 billion left the economy, right? To pay for these divestments. Most of this money came from our commercial banks. Guess what that did? It created a hole within our financial system. That hole got extended by the privatization and payment of the power plants and distribution systems. That became almost $12 billion, right? Of course, $5 billion came back to government because government divested from those plants. But again, government didn't reinvest it. Government used it for something else, and that created a hole. So the $12 billion hole has been what basically, situated what we're facing today.
Yeah, no, and I hear you on that, and one of the things you mentioned is capacity, the capacity of these companies who are taking on these assets to do that. But let's even look at Nigeria's capacity. Recently, NUPRC, the upstream regulator, announced an increase in Nigeria's stated reserves by about 1 billion barrels, which is music to my ears, because for many years we've been sitting on 37 billion. And there's this issue about whether we're adequately replacing our reserves. So what can we do to ensure that we actually replace our reserves and subsequently are able to then really shore up our production?
So Policy and new regulations. NURPC knows this. I mean, Kamala Faye has been very excellent in his approach. First, you have to make reserve replacement ratio at a positive number being mandatory. So the reserve replacement ratio is, the new find divided by the previous production, and that must be at 1 at least. That's 100%. So if you don't have 100% in your reserve replacement, countrywide, you would obviously start to experience decline. And this is what happens with the IOCs. They compute their reserve replacement ratios, perennially, and that shows them how sustainable they've been. Now, in Nigeria's case, you have a few things to do. You have to enforce that. There must be a regulation that makes it mandatory for companies to compute their reserve replacement.
Is that not currently included in our revised Petroleum Industry Act?
No. So PIA was not too firm on it. It's not mandatory. Yes, they give you room to invest. There's also that opportunity to invest, but then it must be mandatory. For every 3 barrels you produce, you must at least put the income from 1 barrel back into finding. Because if you don't maintain a positive portfolio position, then it will be an issue. You can't have sustainable production in the long term. So today we're facing that problem because Nigeria, over the last 4 decades, has probably kept a negative reserve replacement ratio. Yes, the new findings are good, but even the existing reserve needs to be reevaluated. Why? Because the technology used in assessing those reserves previously are no more in use, right? So commonplace today, technology is advanced, and you need to introduce new methods of reevaluating your reserves. We probably have more than 35, 37, whatever number they're talking about. Because, if you look at those technologies were mostly 2Ds and early stage 3Ds. You have all sorts that can actually enhance. And besides, if you look at the economic situation, the price of oil today makes your ultimate recovery number, right, least viable if it's very low. Right. So today we can increase our reserves by reevaluating what's in the ground.
And it'd be interesting to see if legislation evolves in that direction. But now, we talk about the challenges with output, with our reserves, with the divestments. But assuming a world in which we didn't have those problems and we were producing where we were meant to, and we're hitting 3 million barrels a day, which is some of the numbers that have been touted as our most optimal capacity, or even more.
Yes.
How can we strengthen the linkages between the energy sector and the rest of the economy? And I want to look about this bid for our industrialization.
Okay.
It's really anchored on a solid and stable energy sector.
So we've been focusing on something called economic diversification, which is a wrong approach.
Okay. What's the right approach?
Right approach is first look at sectors and have or establish comparative advantages between sectors, and then you integrate them. The oil and gas is your cash cow. So if you look at sectors that can create jobs, sectors that can stabilize or industrialize your economy, you have to integrate them to the oil and gas industry. Case in point is agriculture. Look at what's happening. What are the major inputs? So fertilizer. Fertilizer can come from your natural gas. And of course, your agro-allied processing can be supported by electricity, which of course natural gas would also play a major role. Now, pesticides, insecticides, all of this can be produced from your petrochemical stock, right? So you need to integrate those sectors together. If you keep saying you want to diversify, you're just, not helping.
So essentially what you're saying is diversification cannot happen without integration.
Yes, integration first. Integration should be the floor plan. Right? And then you build on it by having diversification. Without that flow plan, there would always be a gap. Today, if you look at the mining industry, for example, steel, we spend almost $3-4 billion a year importing steel products, different steel products. This is in a year without a large, oil and gas project or a large power project, right? Or without a large pipeline project. Now, when it comes to that, all you need to do is to see how you can support steel production locally, outside the mining.
But you say steel, what about ore itself?
Now, so the steel, it's the iron ore itself, with the aluminum ore, everything, the bauxite, the copper, so you have, but you need to beneficiate these, right? Because the quality of steel we have in Nigeria today, outside the Kogi belt, right, the rest are not up to par. So you need to enhance them further to make them economically viable, and that would involve beneficiation. So it means you must carry out.
Beneficiation essentially means you're adding value to
Yes,
the raw material.
you are enhancing the raw material to
Yeah.
meet the output requirement that gives it the commercial value the market has would find appealing, right? So that's one. But you have copper as well. I mean, if you look at what's happening in cellular, right? What have they done? They've built an end-to-end, gold mining to processing capacity. However, the energy industry should have targeted them and sent a pipeline right there.
A gas pipeline.
Yes, a gas pipeline. So, and that gas pipeline would have been what would power the refinery, what would power the processing facilities, and so on. But, we are fond of just sending pipelines to places where we have plant. I mean, if you look at the AKK, for example, it's targeting 3 power plants that would not come on board till about maybe year 2028 or 2029 or something like that, right? So in the meantime, how would molecules flow? So it means nothing would go through these pipelines until those power plants start to operate and start to consume.
So going back, you said a lot there that I'm trying to unpack, this issue of integration and diversification. Now, if the energy sector was to send the pipeline to Segilola, how do they even find the Segilola in the first place? Does that then become the role of the policymakers to make that information available and ensure that integration?
So if you look at what Qatar has done, right, over the years, Qatar focused on exports of natural gas in the form of LNG, right? They said, listen, domestic, we will take care of that later, but let's look at export, build an export capacity. And that's why you have the QMAXs and so on, right? But there are countries that have built an internal natural gas system. The US, for example. And what does the US do? They look at clusters where industrialization can happen, and they use natural gas as a catalyst. Now, the government doesn't finance it. They make or create an enabling environment for third parties to send the pipelines. So if you look at the Trans-Canada pipelines, or if you look at the Excel pipelines, for example, these are not government entities. These are private sector entities that the government has supported with all forms of concessions and even, the values and policies, right? So when you create the environment to become accommodating of investment, it would naturally, absorb the investment.
Absolutely. Yes. This is also why we need such a strong industrial policy in our country, right? We can talk about it. We have so many things to get through, but I think the policy part is also part of the missing piece here in that, because an industrial policy surely should integrate all of these strategies.
So, the truth is, we have a lot of this. If you go to the archives, if you look at Nigeria's policy, for example,
don't need to
we have the gas utilization incentives, you have the pioneer status, you have the backward integration policy, you have so many of these policies, right? What you don't have is basically the public officer who is selfless to support business in a manner that the business would find just the benefit clearly in front of them, right? And the public officers do not see the need, and it's not their fault in most cases, right? Because there is that capacity where if you're not sitting with your peer, you wouldn't understand. Look at what Singapore has done, right? A minister in Singapore was a former JP Morgan, right? So when they sit across the table, they are able to relate properly. Right? But if you do not improve the capacity of your public officers and you give them assignments to undertake or give them policies to implement, they will not implement them.
Of course, I feel like we could talk about governance and public administration, but I wanted to touch on other issues, which is the electric vehicles. And I know Faulty Technologies, your venture is looking at that. And in fact, you're really going all out.
Yes.
And I'm asking myself, where is the market demand?
So basically, Nigeria, as it is today, might not be ready for electric vehicles in the sense that people would walk into the shop and buy one. Not everybody can afford it. Why? It has a high total cost of ownership, right? So the model we have developed, we started in 2021, 2022, is to offer transportation as a service.
Okay.
So we invest in the vehicles. Right? We invest in everything, employ the drivers, company-owned, company-operated, and then we deploy them as taxis of course, on the normal commercial vehicles.
Sorry to interrupt, but if it's a service, that means I have to have a preference to want to use an EV.
Yes.
Instead of a fossil fuel powered vehicle.
We are giving you the incentive.
Okay.
So I think we should be the only ones doing this, where per every kilometer you travel, we give you a token, and that token basically, it's called a green coin. And what does it do? It is the amount of carbon you're saving for that.
So what does that allow me? Can I go and use that as collateral in the bank?
You can redeem it in future rides.
Oh, in future rides.
Yes,
What would be more powerful is if you could tie it to other incentives beyond that ecosystem. But no, tell me a bit more about the future of these electric vehicles.
So what we've set up is basically focus on Lagos and Abuja. Lagos, the plan is to have 6 different large charging stations. We currently have 1 in Victoria Island, and that basically is to contain our fleet completely. We're talking to the airports, we're talking to the hotels, we're talking to a couple of schools, and even to Nigerian police, right? And this would help basically stabilize the operations. But the target market is the upwardly mobile, right? Who has some semblance of understanding the environment and the impact, the fossil fuels would cause, right? Now, we're slightly cheaper on a per kilometer basis. So if you book a ride between us and the other guys, the platform owners, right? You
like
would see,
Uber or Bolt.
yeah, because these guys, they don't own the mobility asset. We own the mobility assets. We employ the drivers, and because they're able to just charge a fee based on their platforms. So we own all end to end, because in Nigeria, for some reason, if you create a risk of dependency by saying I don't have to own all, we've seen that. You will be exposed without control, right? If you say I'll depend on the third party to charge my vehicles, so you have to start with an end-to-end.
The entire value chain.
And gradually you now start to.
So if I may ask, these charging stations, how are you powering the electricity? Is it gas? Is it solar?
So we are operating a very, very critical energy source here. We're the first green or total green power supply system that will be feeding an electric vehicle.
So solar.
Well, we have solar, we have large batteries, concentrated batteries, right? Concentrated batteries in the sense that, we've been able to create large battery capacities within smaller spaces. And these batteries are able to store up to 3 to 5 days worth of requirements at every charge station. So once the solar panels give the electricity, the batteries store them. And again, we use support from the grid. So now we're talking to companies like Electron, right, to support our backup using the constant electricity from the grid. But we only need 2 hours a day, and that's all we need.
Yeah, because the rest is
stored in our batteries.
In a battery.
Yeah.
So Mr. Damcida, having listened to all this, the final thing I'm thinking is human capacity. Because you're doing so many things that are future forward, that are progressive across the entire value chain. We're living in a Jackpot world.
Yes.
Talent is now global. The world is a global talent pool. There are no borders insofar as talent is concerned. What do we need to do to ensure that this future industrial revolution has the right skill set to ensure that Nigeria derives the optimum from it?
In a country growing in population at 3% per annum, you shouldn't worry about Japa.
Okay.
Why? Because you have the raw material to continue feeding your human capital. All you need to worry about is the knowledge, the skills. So all you do as a country is invite Google, invite Microsoft, John Hopkins, everybody to your country, put in money, allow them to train your people continuously. You'll become the global capital for human capital export. Right? India did that. If you look at what's happening in Silicon Valley, India planned it about 25 years ago, right? Why? Because they have everybody training their people, giving them the skills, and they export the people. The benefit for you as a country is, the diaspora remittances. And this time around, it won't be the hot money type remittance. Because what we have today is the hot money type remittance. Money coming for school fees, money coming for rent, for healthcare. So the money hardly spends 2 weeks, 3 weeks. In the beneficiaries account.
So how can we get the long-term money remittance?
Good. Yeah. So when you have the critical mass out in your diaspora, first you must have a diaspora program. Ensure that people going out are going out because they understand the guidelines. people shouldn't go out there and create problems for others, through getting involved in all sorts. If you have a proper diaspora program, what it will do is it will flesh out, all the capacities that you need, and then take out those that you've really built from the grassroots, and they can go abroad. They can even work here and earn a foreign exchange, through some of the outsourcing models here, right? And if you are going to now raise capital from the diaspora, it must be project tied. So you'll identify projects and say, diaspora, I have a project. I would issue bonds on the back of that project. But you don't issue bonds without having a project.
Yeah.
And this project can be, well, I want to improve tertiary education. I'm inviting Oxford, Harvard, everybody to come into my universities, Unilag, ABU, everywhere, Nsuka, and they would be improving capacity so that they will give my citizens the knowledge of the modern day. And that way, I would need a bond because these citizens graduate, and after they graduate, they have a workplace at Andela in New York, or Microsoft in California, or in Seattle or somewhere, right? And that way, you'll be able to earn back from these people. Because it's easy. I mean, if you hear the whole talk around student loans and all of that, yes, it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
But if you fund the student, and this student goes out to the marketplace, how do they pay back? Because the opportunities for employment are not there. You must also complement that with seeding the students. So it will be best that you look at the entrepreneurship part of every knowledge or skill you're building or developing in those students. Right? The entrepreneurship part is what would absorb the seed capital and create some form of transformation.
Yeah, essentially what you're saying is that for every investment the government essentially makes in skills, there needs to be tied to some economic value that will return to the country, whether they're local or they're overseas.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, this also depends on us creating a conducive environment for that money to come. And that's a whole nother show because we're running out of time. So very, very briefly, can you tell us some of the things that need to happen for that sort of structure to be realized and deliver value to the Nigerian economy?
So basically what you need to do is, rather than go to invest in finding oil in Bauchi, spending $2 billion or so, you should take that $2 billion, call on Google, Microsoft, call on all the very high tech and all of that people, and say, guys, I have $500 million as my equity contribution. Can you match my funding? I want you to train maybe 200 or 300,000 people, to have the skills of the modern day. And what's that? This is artificial intelligence. This is machine learning. This is all sorts, right? And if you do that, the catalyst that would exist in that is your ability to put in money. Once you put in money, the environment is already half conducive.
Yeah.
So
indeed. I mean, look, so much there to unpack. I wish we had another 30 minutes to go through this, but Mr. Damcida, we have to invite you back to tell us about it. And I'd like to hear about how the electric vehicle segment is in. But clearly, there's a huge opportunity
we need to invite you guys to come.
Certainly,
we
will be happy to. I've been speaking to Dr. Well, I call you a doctor because you sounded like a doctor of philosophy. No. But I've been speaking to Mr. Ahmad Damcida, CEO of Energy Culture, founder of Full-Tie Technologies, on the energy sector and industrialization. So much there to reflect on. That's all we have time for in Business Week. Let's continue the conversation online. Do have a lovely rest of the weekend. I'm Rola K. Akin.